Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to James Glennie to talk about the solutions and opportunities that might exist right here in Saskatchewan regarding wind energy. So if you want to...
Yeah, thanks Darren, thanks for having me along. I don't actually have a presentation because it was a bit sort of last minute this, and I was just asked if I could speak, and I was told that we'd probably be over time, so sort of keep it sort of 10 minutes or so I didn't do a presentation. But just very quickly by way of background, I'm a geologist, geophysicist. I worked in the oil and gas industry for 10 years in the UK, Russia, and then I left that when I realised some of the problems associated with the industry. I actually used business school to transition into renewable energy, and I spent business school looking at, in fact when I was in business school I was the only guy in the school who was studying renewables. They called me Windy Jim and people thought I was a bit weird. But I used business school to really investigate the market for renewables, and I looked at the various different technologies, biomass, wind, solar, and the thing that really struck me was wind energy was far and away the most economic at the time. And that's obviously changed now with solar, which is still not as good as wind, but is certainly improving in economics in the last few years. Anyway, I got into the wind industry. I worked in the wind industry in the UK, across mainland Europe actually as well, and I also moved to New Zealand. I worked there in Australia as well, and then I moved to the States. Well, actually I moved to Canada, and I worked at the Wind Energy Institute of Canada before it was shut down by Harper in his infinite wisdom. So I moved down to the University of Houston, where I was working on a big renewables project down there before moving back up to Canada. Last summer I was driving across Canada. I was actually on my way back to New Zealand, but I was driving across Canada, and when I got to Saskatchewan, one of the things that struck me was there's this enormous wind resource here, and also in fact a solar resource as well. And in fact, actually just on that point about solar, I just wanted to touch on Diane's presentation. She did give some numbers for the solar resource here, which I think was 2,350 hours, versus in Phoenix, Arizona at 4,000. And in fact, one of the points about that, which is quite interesting, is because I did some work for the institute, I worked at the Institute of Nanotechnology in the University of Houston, and one of the things we were looking at was solar panels. But one of the things I think people forget about solar panels is that they're semiconductors, and as semiconductors, they don't conduct as well when they're hot. So although there's a lot better amount of sun in Arizona, there's about 60% more sun in Arizona than there is in Saskatchewan. You actually only get 10% more output from solar panels in Arizona than you do here in Saskatchewan, because the cool weather makes solar panels work better. Anyway, that was a bit of a digression. But as I arrived here in Saskatchewan, I was really struck by the very strong solar resource and wind resource here. And a lot of people, because of my background in the wind and renewables sector, said to me, why can't we get more of our power from wind energy? And I said, well, I don't know, I'll look at that. And I did look at it. And there isn't actually an answer to that question, why can't we get more power from wind energy? Because we can get more power from wind energy. When the big Chaplin project, which SaskPower just awarded to Algonquin Power out of Ontario, when that's built in 2016, that will, the amount of power that's being produced in the province here will be, from wind, will be about 5%. And SaskPower actually publicly stated, Rob Watson, CEO of SaskPower, publicly stated when he was in town here in February, he said that in my lifetime, which I think is never a good thing to say, he said in my lifetime we will not have more than 5% wind on the system in Saskatchewan. I'd like to throw down the gauntlet on that one. But if you look at other provinces, I did mention when I was answering a question earlier, if you look at other provinces in North America, and I'm thinking of South Dakota and Minnesota, they're already at about, I think, 22-23% of their electricity is coming from wind. There's a total of 7 other states in the US which are getting between 10 and 20%. Portugal is at about 23 or 4%. In fact, for the entire month of January of this year, they were at 60% of their electricity was coming from wind. Spain is similarly in excess of 20%, as is Ireland. Germany is currently at 7%, but is aiming for about 20% in, I think, 2020. Denmark is at 20%, is aiming for 50% by 2050, I think. So the point is we can have a lot more wind. So one of the things I was doing when I was thinking, right, how can we get more wind on the system here, is I thought, right, why can't we have more wind on the system? And it turns out it's SaskPower.
Yeah.
So how does one get around that? And in fact, when I looked at it, at the end of the day, if you're going to put more wind on the system, you need what's called a PPA. You need to sell the power to someone. Trouble in Saskatchewan is there's a monopoly, SaskPower. That monopoly exists everywhere in the province, apart from in Swift Current, where they have their own power company, and here in Saskatoon, where we have our own power company, Saskatoon Light and Power. The interesting thing about it is if you look at the legislation, Saskatoon Light and Power is able to buy its electricity from third parties other than SaskPower. And really on the back of that basic idea is where I got the idea for Saskatoon Community Wind. Now a lot of people will tell you that a sort of community project, and when I say a lot of people, I'm talking about big private developers, which is really what you find throughout the English-speaking world when it comes to developing wind energy. It's done by big private developers. Now, if you go and ask them, they'll tell you that a community wind project is inefficient, it's more expensive, and it's much better to have very large, big wind projects like the existing Centennial project outside Swift Current, and like the very big Chaplin project that's going to be built quite near to Centennial. In fact, that's not true. And in fact, if you look at Denmark and Germany, they pioneered in the very early days of the industry, they pioneered community wind. And they said, wind is fundamentally different than the big thermal or big hydro generation stations that we've seen in electricity networks around the world. It's fundamentally different. As a result, if it's going to work, it's got to involve local people, because at the end of the day, it's their resource, they've got to be involved, they've got to design it, they've got to decide if they want it, they've got to decide where it's going to be, and if you don't do that, you're just going to be fighting all the way. And indeed, that has been the experience of the English-speaking world, and if I think about the countries I've worked in, Britain, America, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, it's very much every wind project is a fight. It's about taking on the local community and saying, this is what you need, we're going to do it for you. But if I look at the experience from Germany and Denmark, when they built wind projects, it's a very different process. It's the community, they go to the community and the community says, hey, we'd like to do a wind project. How do you want it to be built? Where do you want it to be built? And that's a very non-confrontational process. And I wanted to replicate that here. And Saskatoon Community Wind was really the idea that came out of that. And for the last 10 months I've been working on that project and working with the city on that project. And that process is still going through. There hasn't been a lot of public consultation so far. And the reason for that is really I'm waiting until we've got that PPA, until we've got that guaranteed buyer in place. And I'm hoping that's going to come through in the next few months. Once that's in place, then we're going to involve the community much more in terms of saying, do you want this project? Where do you want it to be? How big do you want it to be? How do you want it to be structured? But in the meantime, we do have a website. It's Saskatoon Community Wind. I'd encourage everyone to go there, sign up for it, show your interest, tell other people about it, get people interested, because at the end of the day, this is a community project. If the community's not going to support it, it's not going to happen. So it's up to you, the community, whether you want it or not, and I'd encourage everyone to get involved. It will be a $45 million project, and it has the potential to provide, at the moment, 5%, but it could easily provide 10%, 15%, or 20% of the city's electricity. So that's essentially it in a nutshell, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Thank you. SaskatoonCommunityWind.ca. But the one is of Google, just type in Saskatoon.
Yeah, I kind of
it comes up.
Just want to know.
Yeah.
And is there possibilities also to invest in? That's what you're saying?
Absolutely, yes. Obviously, the first thing is we need to sort out a buyer, which that's currently we're negotiating with the city on that. But yeah, once that's all in place, then definitely there'll be an opportunity to invest. But that's probably going to be, I would say, at least a year and a half away.
Okay. Can that be speeded up?
It could be speeded up, but one of the principal things when you're going out to the public for investment is you have to produce a very detailed what's called financial prospectus, and that has to list all the risks.
That sounds really good to me already.
Oh, good. Yeah, because obviously you don't just go to people unless you're Bernie Madoff or something like that. You don't just go to people and say, give me your money. There's a lot of detail that goes behind it. But for a wind farm, obviously, the most important thing is the wind resource.
How many wind farms do you already
Where?
in Saskatchewan?
I think it's about 8, but most of them are quite small. The 80% of all the installed capacity is in the 2 wind farms of Centennial and Chaplin, which will be commissioned in 2016.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut this off. Sorry.
There was actually one question, I think.
Yes?
I have a question that also pertains to solar, about like the production of the wind generating unit and the lifespan of it, and really the cost of building it and the pollution making it, or a solar panel, and then its lifespan before it has to be replaced. Is there some kind of factor that the output of electricity far outweighs those costs?
That was a lot of questions. That was
Did
the
you get
output,
my
but
general drift?
I think I generally did, yes. In terms of the carbon dioxide and pollution associated with manufacturing, that is offset by the carbon dioxide which isn't emitted coming from thermal coal-fired power stations. That is offset in 7 months
There you
by
go.
a wind turbine. And you're
And
Other
then
questions?
what's the lifespan of the unit, or do you just replace
typically
the
you'll want
motor?
to structure the financing of the entire project to get your project paid back in 15 years, but the operating lifespan is 20 years, but based on the operating lifespan of some of the early projects that went in Denmark and Germany, 30 years is very possible.
Okay. Is it more efficient in that regard than solar? Like solar panels were.
Are you asking like return on energy, like return on investment?
Well, just how efficient it really is when you factor in the production costs and the lifespan costs of those
So
technologies.
like energy in, energy out kind
But
of
if
thing?
you're just talking about costs,
It's kind of costs and efficiency and
Well,
pollution rolled into one big.
well, pollution, as I say, a coal plant never pays itself back because a coal plant is only 30% efficient. So you put in a ton of coal and you get out only 30% of that is energy that's usable. So I mean, you're never going to pay back a coal plant. But a wind turbine, you pay back
Okay.
all that energy in 7 months.
So I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to end that here,
But
and
can
there
I
is
just answer the one thing on the cost,
okay.
which is critical. We can produce power from a wind turbine outside of town based on the very detailed modelling that we've done at starting price at the same price as Saskatoon Light Power is currently paying Saskpower for its energy.
Wow. So get ready to invest in the future, Saskatchewan. Can you? What's the website again?
Saskatoon Community Wind.
SaskatoonCommunityWind.ca.